With all that said, and without further ado, it is time to get into our first lecture of the day. Here to teach you all about reaving. He hails from the kingdom of Golden Vale. He is a walker of the middle. Please put your, digital hands together for Gorovan Dramson and the Reaving Lecture. Take it away, Gorovan.
Hello, and welcome to So You Want to Be a Reeve, my class for Paragon Bootcamp. My name is Gorovan, my pronouns are he, him, or they, them. I've been playing Amtgard for about 6 years now, and I was awarded Walker of the Middle at Fury this past September. In this talk, I'll be going over how to elevate your reaving game and go from doing reaving to being a reeve. Next slide, please. So the first step to being a reeve is, of course, knowledge. Reeves are the keepers of the code when it comes to Amtgard. Not only are we expected to simply have knowledge, we are expected to have a deep enough understanding to share our knowledge and act on it. When most people think about what kind of knowledge a reeve should have, they immediately think of rules knowledge. While that is absolutely important, a lot more goes into being a reeve than simply knowing the rules. But of course it helps. Next slide, please. So, how do you go about gaining knowledge? The best way is to ask the right question. I've broken it down into the 6 classic W questions. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Now, I know I just said you should ask questions, but please don't ask me how is considered a W question. I do not know. You can remember these questions because of your knowledge, or maybe because you are nosy and getting your knowledge down. Yeah? Alright, so first off, what to know. This is broadly separable into immediate, inferable, and referenceable knowledge. Immediate knowledge is things that you should be able to recall offhand with little to no delay. This includes things like the various color codes we have for things like class sashes, magic balls, enchantment strips, specialty areas, but also important game information like what's the death count? Which team am I on? Inferable knowledge is related to immediate knowledge in that it's information that can quickly be deduced from the immediate knowledge you have. If you know the states and how incants work, you can pretty quickly tell a confused player what that command V to stop spell did based on the command keyword and stop state, even if you don't know all the particulars of Hold. Lastly is referenceable knowledge that isn't necessary to memorize, but you should at least have a working knowledge of it, know how to and where to reference it if need be. This includes things like armor modifiers, the specifics of what counts as heavy gauge versus or superior overlap, or things like magic costs, how many points of magic an ability costs, or how many trinkets a monster can use when they're tinker ability. This also includes things like specific invulnerabilities of a scenario monster in that given scenario, not just general rules knowledge. When? Once you know the information, or know enough to know what's not important to know, you have to know when to make a call. The middle of a game is not the time to be digging through a rulebook. It doesn't really matter. Sphere of Annihilation must strike a player to kill them or touch a player to kill them. What matters is whether a player is dead. Minimize delays. Don't try to redo an encounter, but also know when to move on. If a player wasn't unique enough in their targeting on a verbal, but the intended recipient took it and he's already halfway back to base, just let it go. And maybe talk to the caster if it happens again. Once you make a call or don't, stick with it and get things moving again. The next question is where to look. Once a game is over and it's time to figure out what the correct call in that one scenario was, where do you look? While no one is expected to have the rules of play memorized down to the page number, you should generally have an idea of where you should be looking for a given piece of information. This includes knowing the general order of the battle games, general order of the chapters, how to use the index in the rulebook, and so on. Similarly, if you don't know where the next battle game is, you should know at least where the schedule is posted, things like that. There are plenty of resources at your disposal in this modern age of medievalism, so also familiarize yourself with any tools that suit your style and actually benefit you, like Ken Walker's Easy Guard, or the official Amtgard Rules Clarification group on Facebook. What happens when you're looking for something and you just can't seem to find it anywhere? You give up, right? Most must not have been very important. No, of course not. You ask someone. You go to someone and say, hey, I'm looking for this thing, can't find it. Can you please help me locate it? Do you know where else there might be more information on it? In my experience, every kingdom has a walking rulebook or 3. Getting to know these people and talking shop with them is a very important way to expand your rules knowledge and also to network with other people who are knowledgeable about the game. Again, there are parallels for this who to ask in non-rule scenarios, and that you should know who your crats are, who the offers are at the local park, and they can help you find information. If the schedule doesn't say whether a park battle is going to be militia or full class, I'm sure the Warcrat knows they're going to be the one mark. As long as you know who to ask when you can't find the information yourself, you should be well set to continue on your way without having to know the exact location, because you can leverage the community around. Why is a tricky question, but it's one that helps boost you to the next level of reading. Understanding not just what a rule says, but also why it says that helps you tease out the intricacies of both that and other abilities or mechanics. Why is Blood and Thunder on a kill trigger, but Assassinate is cast immediately upon killing a person? It's because kill triggers are melee only, and Assassinate can be used on range kills. Boom, you learned something, hopefully. If you go and apply that line of thinking of comparing one element to another, seeing why the language in one mechanic is slightly different from another, what impact that has on gameplay, you'll be better suited to take that line of thinking and that pattern of thinking and apply it to other scenarios. An on-class game example of this is something like running tournaments. If you're doing an Iron Man tournament where you have a bear pit or a open section where you're going to be counting win streaks and win counts and using that to seed a bracket, why would you, for example, run a bear pit for a style and then the bracket for that style and then go to the next style and do the same thing over again, when usually the same people tend to end up in the brackets for any given category? Why not run all of the bear pits and have all your seedings so that anyone who didn't qualify can go off and rest up, go do another battle game, whatever it is, and then run your brackets? If you weigh the pros and cons, you can consider things like, when will we have breaks? When will the people that aren't as conditioned to fight and therefore probably aren't as experienced, probably aren't placing, when are they going to be taking breaks? When in that time period will you be scheduling your drafting your brackets? Things like, people tend to have a certain mindset for one style of fighting, and shifting back and forth after you've done all your bear pits and all 5 styles, having to go back to single short again could throw some fighters off and affect their performance. Again, if you can go through the thought process of seeing cause and effect, pros and cons, you'll get more comfortable with that way of thinking, and later on down the line, you'll be more confident in the calls that you make because you've thought through the process behind your decision, and you'll become faster at it, more comfortable at it, and more confident. It helps develop your intuition, and overall just makes you a better decision maker, not just a reader. Thinking through every course of action is not just important in being able to explain why, but also in being able to come to a more sound conclusion in the future. The last question is how. Whether this be a detailed action plan or simply recognizing an issue and remembering to avoid it in the future, planning and preparation is the only way to improve in anything. If you identify a common misconception at your park, you can make a note to, at the next all thing, make a general reminder of, hey, this misconception we've been playing with is actually not what the rules say. Let's all work together and have each other's back on making sure that we all learn the right way to play and don't make that mistake again. It's also a nice way that if there's only a few people that have that issue, you're not calling anyone out in particular and putting the focus on that. Similarly, if a specific player disagreed with the call you made and they ended up being right, you had the rule wrong or whatever it is, you can bring it up to them and acknowledge, hey, I was wrong, but thanks for going with it, and I'll make sure that now that I know this rule, I won't make that call again in the future. They will feel not just vindicated that they were right, but they'll also feel respected. And I think that's a very important element in being a Reeve, is that you have to have the respect of the players in order to be effective. If a player disagreed with a call and you ended up being right, offer to explain it to them, but remember that once the game ends, we're all equals. You're not the Reeve anymore, we're just two Amtgarders after a game. If someone just wants to say, fine, you were right, let's go on, and they want to move on, don't push it. The reason that I have put these steps in this order is that this is the order you should work through a problem. You should already know what you need to know, have that on hand, being able to reference your immediate knowledge or know where to look up the referenceable knowledge, and the faster you know it, the faster you can make that call. That's step 2, is making the call, knowing when do you make that call, when do you let it go, how do you apply your knowledge. And then afterwards, not in the middle of the game, where do you look to make sure you were right? And then if you can't find that, who to ask. And if you've gotten into a conversation and you've figured out the answer, try and reason your way through it to be able to apply that knowledge going forward. And then, going forward, what do you do? Next slide, please. All right, part 2, application. Once you establish your knowledge and you're getting comfortable with reading, it's time to walk the walk and put your knowledge in practice. After all, the most important part to being a good Reeve is actually doing the thing. You can't be a good Reeve if you don't. Application is one of the more visible components of Reeving, but it's not necessarily what makes you a Paragon, it's just what makes you a Reeve. That being said, you still have to take the action in order to be recognized as being an exemplar. Next slide, please. All right, so application. You can remember the components of application as B-E-S-T, best, the very best, that no one ever was. So that is B, battle games, E, education, S is service, and T is tournaments. Similar to how caster paragons are expected to demonstrate ability using any given archetype in their class, but are usually going to specialize in just one or two, Reeves are expected to fulfill multiple roles under their shiny gold Reeving umbrella. Battle games are Reeves' day-to-day responsibility. Whether these be ditch, militia, full class, quest scenario, whatever it be, every park in Amtgard usually does at least one battle game each park, usually. Battle games, in some ways, are the most Reeve-y role a Reeve will have, in that it encompasses both class abilities and general game mechanics, but it also, being able to keep track of every element on the field is harder than when you just have like a single tournament with 2 fighters and you can focus on just the shots between those 2. You have to be watching the entire field. You have to be watching the caster and their targeting. You have to be making sure that the person back at base and chanting is putting the right strips on, or people counting states or respawn counters aren't going too quickly or too slowly. It's definitely the most hectic role you'll have as a Reeve, but it's also the most fun, in my opinion, and in my case, it's definitely the one that I think I'm the strongest. Everyone will have a different experience with that, of course, but in my case, I find battle gaming the most fun. Education and service kind of go hand in hand. In some ways, they are very similar, but education, in my mind, is more about teaching classes like this, or making sure you're educating your players. It's more of the day-to-day personal interactions, whereas service is a bit more higher level. It's tactics versus strategy. It's things like being GMR, being a Reevocrat, running a weapon check. And they're both important for very different reasons. Education not only demonstrates that you have the knowledge that we talked about in section 1, it also demonstrates your accessibility. Any Paragon should be someone that a new player can go to and ask questions, get help, have a mentor. If you aren't out there and educating people, then new players won't feel comfortable going to you and asking questions and getting help. It's all well and good to know the rulebook like the back of your hand, but unless there's scenarios where you are actually sharing that knowledge and helping the community, it's not doing anyone else any good besides yourself. Service is similar in that it shows a dedication to the community, but more so than specifically showing acts of support. It shows that you're dedicated. It shows that you actually care about not just the game of Amtgard, but the society around it. A lot of people like to say Amtgard is just a game, but at the end of the day, what is in the rulebook is not the entirety of Amtgard. Amtgard is the entire culture and society that is built up around those games. and holding office, running events. These are things that we as Reeves need to do to show that Reeving is a pillar of this community. It's a part of the foundation of making sure that our honor-based game can extend to a respectful community. Additionally, you personally serving in office or serving as a Reevocrat shows that you have individual responsibility. If you sign up to Reevocrat and you end up not bringing anything to the field, you didn't open weapon check on time, no one's going to trust you to Reeve again. It's a lot harder to build back up trust once it's been lost than it is to maintain that trust or establish that trust. Once you've held a role as a Reevocrat, it's important to analyze what you did and learn from it. I know, for example, the first time that I Reevocrat, at a Kingdom event, I was way too strict on weapon check. Everyone complained that their weapons were being failed for many school things. They never failed for at local field, and that is an issue. There's a fine line between what the rules say, what they're intended, what the purpose of those rules, going back to Section 1 and the why. Know that there's what the rule says, why it says it, and why it's important to enforce the rule in a fair and equitable manner. The best way to get that experience is to go outside your bubble of your local park and what your experience is there, and go at a kingdom level, go to another kingdom, go serve on the Reeve team at another kingdom event and see how their culture of Reeving is different from the one you're used to. Talk to Reeves from other kingdoms. And tournaments. Kind of the counterpart to battle games. Tournaments are the distilled essence of being the referee of Amtgard. They're much more concrete skills you need to have. Personally, tournaments are my weak spot as a Reeve. I am not an experienced fighter. I do not have the shot knowledge. I don't have the eye to track shots as well. And so I often rely on high-level fighters to support me. Beyond just being the ring Reeve, though, there are other Reeves that are involved in tournaments. There's a person who's actually organizing the tournament, figuring out the format, figuring out the styles, the order that to go in. And that is also equally important as a Reeve to be able to serve at both the high-level and low-level roles in tournaments. Reeves are not just the people who call shots. They're the people that make the game roll. Another important aspect of tournaments is that there's a very high-pressure scenario. While there are examples of high-pressure battle games like Phoenix League, tournaments, especially due to the Sword Path Awards, people care a lot about the accuracy and reliability of Reeves. And being able to handle that pressure is very important, because a blown call can actually affect someone's performance in a tournament and then go on to affect their performance as whatever they're doing on the Sword Path. That's not to say that if you blow a call, it's the end of the world, but it is something to be conscious of, and other people will be watching to see how you handle that pressure and make sure that you're doing a good job. So you've got two aspects of being on the field and Reeving, battle games and tournaments. And there's two aspects of off the field, being part of the community, being an educator, doing service. All four of these are, in my opinion, equally important to being not just a Reeve, but a Paragon Reeve. You need to do all four. You can't say, oh, I don't Reeve tourneys, I'm always going to be fighting in them. That's a really big part of Reeving. You can't say, oh, I'll Reeve battle games, or I'll Reeve tournaments, but I want to play Wizard today, and I'm not going to Reeve. Because, again, that's a huge part of Reeving. And even if you do all that on-field activity, you still need to give back to the community. Just because you Reeve a lot doesn't make you a Paragon. It just means that you're experienced. In order to be a Paragon, you need to be an exemplar of what it means to be a Reeve, and a lot of that is service. Unlike the other classes, Reeves are a service role. You're not the one who's going to do your best by dominating a field. You're going to be doing your best by making sure that games happen, games run well, people enjoy themselves. And that's really the core of what sets apart people who Reeve a lot and people who are Reeve. Next slide, please. Part 3 is visibility. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay. So visibility is important because this is really that tipping point that I was just talking about. If you want to be awarded Paragon, you need to be what people think of when I think of a Reeve. They can't just be, oh yeah, that person, I guess they Reeve a lot. It's no, when I think of a Reeve, I think of you. I think of you and that moment when you were Reeving and you made that call, when you made sure the game went well, when you helped me out. I didn't know the answer to a question. Being visible is one of the biggest struggles that people have when they're on the path to Paragon, because they say, oh, I play this class all the time. I think I'm really good at it, but no one knows who I am. I'm like, look, no one knows who you are. Are you really succeeding in your role as a player? Because that's the real difference. If you're not the exemplar of a class, you are not a Paragon. You're just someone who does something a lot. Next slide. Okay, so visibility, I have this nice little acronym. It's kind of on theme, LAMP. So just like a lamp helps you see, LAMP is going to help you with visibility. So LAMP is look the part, accept responsibility, make yourself known, and so looking the part is pretty straightforward. Wear a damn sash. Or have a Reeve stick now with that new change in how what equipment Reeves can use. You can also use a multicolored Reeve staff. Whatever your look is, make sure that you exemplify it when you're Reeving. Don't just say, oh, I'm going to sit this out and I'm going to still have my spell bag on, class sash, and a bundle of enchantment strips. That's not going to set you apart as a Reeve. That's just going to be, oh, that guy who wasn't playing for some reason. It also helps you in that you're less likely to get hit because someone thinks you're playing. Beyond just having the equipment to bare minimum be a Reeve, though, you should have a Reeve kit. You should have your own gear to check weapons, to run games. At the very least, you should have a measuring tape. You can check a weapon with just a measuring tape if you really need to. But you shouldn't need to. You should have other gear on you. You should have a weapon checker, rings to check the diameter of weapons, calipers to measure armor, or gauges. If you want to get a little bit fancy, you can bring whistles or team tabards, game items, maybe a heavy object in the back of your car you can pull out and run a game at the drop of a hat. This is where being a Reeve kind of lends itself towards Smith path, working as a service member of, if you can Reeve a game, you should be able to run a game. Because beyond just the Reeves that are around making sure the game is running well, there is the head Reeve or game designer, bureaucrat, who is still a Reeve. If you can't run a game by yourself or with support, you're not doing the full stack Reeving. And one nice thing is that because you don't have to worry about fighting in your garb, put some flair into it. Get some poofy sleeves. Get a really nice Reeve sash that is not practical to hang an enchantment strip on. If you look like you are a Reeve, people will see you and think, oh, that's a Reeve over there. There's not just another person. It's a very big part of embodying the role of a Reeve. Next is accepting responsibility. It's a more serious topic because this is something that a lot of people struggle with, in that Reeving is a volunteer job, and just like all volunteer culture in Amtgard, we have issues getting people to. We have issues in all areas of volunteership because of many different factors I'm not going to get into, but being a Reeve is a tough job. There's a lot of responsibility. You live and die on your reputation as a Reeve. People remember your negatives more, which means that it's easier to be known by your failures than your successes. You need to make sure that you are owning both equally. Just because you ran a great event, or Reeve consistently, or had weapon check open for the entire event, if you were failing good weapons, if you were passing bad weapons, if you were blowing calls, people remember that more. And it's important to know that when that happens, you need to own it. I have made bad calls. I have had to own up to that. I've had to apologize. I've had to tell people, hey, I made that call wrong. I ran this tournament wrong. I did something else. Whatever it was, I'm sorry. We'll have to move on, but I'm accepting responsibility. And you have to do it publicly. You can't just be like off in a corner and being like, oh, I'm sorry, but we're going to pretend this didn't happen. It happens. You have to own it. You have to show yourself being a responsible adult member of society who can take it on the chin and learn from it and move on. Sometimes you'll get a reputation. This happens. It is hard to work back from. The best way to fight a negative reputation as a bad Reeve is to learn from your mistakes, prove to others that you've learned from your mistakes, and do better in the future. You just need to keep moving. Make sure that the people who have been negatively affected by your bad know what happened, know why it happened, and know that you are going to fix it. And then you need to actually fix it. You need to follow up. On a lighter note, making yourself known. So this is your name. This is your face. This is being active online. This is traveling. This is putting your game name when you're making posts about events or battle games, sticking your face on an event bid so that people can recognize you. It's things like introducing the Reeve team before a game. When you're at an event and not everyone knows each other, it can be helpful to not just know someone's name so you can call out their name and cast on them, but it's also helpful to know your Reeve's name. It's helpful to say, hey, Gorovan, I have a question about where the boundary is, or is this a hard boundary? Can I teleport past it? It's a lot easier to get your attention if you know someone's name. It's also important because if someone is trying to think of exemplars of paragons to maybe recommend someone for a paragon, if they don't know your name, they can't submit an award recommendation for you. Someone saying, oh yeah, that Reeve did blank will not reflect on you unless they know who did it. Both good and bad. So if you're going to make yourself known, you should work on making those good calls. And then presence, both local and kingdom. There's a pressure, especially with standard class paragons, where you want to level whatever class leveling at home because everyone knows you, they know you're a good wizard, whatever. And I'll save pulling out all the stops and doing a great job when I'm at Kingdom, and the monarch who can give me a paragon is going to see. Avoid that. You cannot improve if you're not working at the thing you are trying to improve. And especially with Reeving, where if you're at a local level and Reeving a lot, it's not like you're going to be unbalancing battle games and making people have less fun. Reeving is important. You need Reeves at a local level, just the way you need Reeves at a Kingdom level. Not to mention that because Reeves are kind of in that service role of being in the background, Reeves can't afford to have time off of being present, being available. If you only Reeve when no one else will, then are you really a Reeve, or are you just Reeving because you have to? And also, if you're Reeving a local level consistently and people at your park get to know you as the one who Reeves, then when you get to a Kingdom level and people are asking, oh, we need an extra Reeve, people will recommend you. People will do your advertising you for you. Again, there are some exceptions to this because at a local level, you might not have as many players. You might not necessarily play with a Reeve at a local level. A lot of parks don't. It's important to, if you have an opportunity to Reeve, take it. A lot of parks also have a rule where if you are, well, not a rule, but an expectation that if you Reeve, you can still get a class. You're not going to be impeding your leveling progression. You're just helping people out and getting a reward for it. Next slide, please. All right, Paragon. So this is kind of a broad topic. This is what do people look for in a paragon? So what the rulebook says are three main points. One, consistently being an excellent example of your class. You should look like, roleplay, and be highly effective at playing. And you should take the lead in teaching new players. Those are the 3 concrete guidelines for awarding Paragon that are in the rulebook. Paragon's not part of the award standardization. There is no inter-kingdom, what is a Paragon? Some kingdoms have tiered awards for battlefield tactics. Some people have rubrics for what they look for in a Paragon. Some kingdoms have circles of Paragon, some don't. Some require recommendations, some don't. It varies wildly across kingdoms. However, the one consistent thing is that Paragon, like literally the definition of Paragon, means a perfect example of blank. If when people think of if someone asks me, what is a Reeve in Amtgard, you can point to them, oh, that person's a Reeve, that person is Reeving. Then you are that example. But it's not just enough to be the example, because what the rulebook asks for is mentorship. You need to teach. You need to work with newer Reeves. You need to help ease new players into the game. One thing that is a special benefit of being a Reeve over a battle game class is that when onlookers are watching and maybe going to get involved, you're in a good situation where you can step away from the game for a second and say, hey, are you interested in joining? You can do some recruitment for your part. And that will unbalance the game. Obviously, you still need to be present and watching in order to do your job, but you have this nice little meta role where you can pull someone in and be like, hey, you're new, you're having some trouble. Here's some tips. Maybe not in those words. People don't like to know that they're having trouble, but if they recognize it themselves, you're there to help them. There's also a nice thing in that if someone is trying to break into Reeving, the best way to learn is to do. And so a lot of people will be like, I want to get better at Reeving. I'm going to just Reeve. But they have no idea what they're doing yet. They haven't done it yet. It's not their fault. But having another Reeve there to back them up is a really good way to help guide someone into Reeving. This can be when you're in a tournament setting, pairing up an experienced Reeve with an inexperienced Reeve on a ring, and having the experienced Reeve be the lead Reeve, and the other one shadowing them and making sure that while they can still make calls if it's on the other side of the fighters from the lead Reeve, they're learning and watching the other Reeve as well and learning from them. Or literally just shadowing. You can just have someone following you around while you're running a tournament and learning what you're doing. But if you're going to do this, you need to make sure that you're benefiting the person who is shadowing you. You still have to do your job, you still have to run the tournament, but you also need to make sure that the person who is shadowing you is benefiting. This can mean whenever you make a decision, as long as you have time to do so, explaining why to the shadow. This can be if you are running a battle game and you see that there's a newer or less experienced Reeve on the sideline, check in with them after the game. See if they want some feedback or if they have a question. If a couple of new players are visibly confused about what just happened, be like, hey, this is what happened. You good? Whatever it is, make sure that you're not just Reeving for yourself, but making sure that you're Reeving for everyone. It's a community goal. Now, there's a culture of elitism in certain nerd culture areas. This is things like rules discussions, fighting, class gaming. Nerds like their hierarchies. Reeves get like a mix of rules, fighting, class gaming, all these different areas that have this tendency to lord your knowledge over others, to be a dick. Break the mold. Do not fall into that trap. It's very important that in everything that you do, you are gracious, that you are accepting of those who are not as experienced as you and therefore are making mistakes. There's a tendency of if someone asks a simple question, just saying, it's in the rulebook, look it up. But not everyone reads the rulebook. A lot of the rules of Amtgard are by word of mouth. Someone might not know where in the rulebook a rule is. You as a Reeve should know where in the rulebook it is and be able to tell them, hey, if you're looking for rules general abilities, it's right before the ability list. Don't just look and it's like, hey, someone castling on me. I don't know what that did. You should not only know, but be able to after the game be like, hey, I know you had confusion with that rule. Do you want to go over it? Do you want to learn more about it? This is teaching classes in ways that are approachable. This is making sure that if people are doing that trap of new player comes up and says, what class should I play? And people are like, oh, this class is the best. You shouldn't play like that. That's not optimal. Whatever. Tell them to cut it out. Tell them, hey, this person just wants to have some fun. Let's work with them and figure out what kind of play style they want, what equipment is available. Hey, you said that you shouldn't play Bard first level because you don't get enough magic. Well, maybe you should help them write a spell list. Hey, you shouldn't play Warrior because you don't have armor. Well, I see you've got a gambeson you're not wearing. You want to let it out to them? Taking the lead in the community and making sure that everyone is engaging in a respectful and positive manner is a huge part of being a responsible Amtgarder, and you should not be recognized in this community if you are not being a positive influence on the community. This is true of all Paragons, not just Reeves. But Reeves naturally fall into that kind of leadership role because of the meta role that we next slide, please. So, bit of a sidebar. So Paragon Reeve versus Paragoning standard. This by standard classes, there's a set of characters than there. And we're back. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. So the sidebar about Paragoning a Reeve versus Paragoning a standard class. There are a different set of expectations for Paragons of Reeving versus Paragons of Wizard or Druid or Bard or Warrior. A Paragon of a standard class is expected to have in-depth knowledge of their class, know exactly how to play it, know the meta, be effective on the field, all this stuff, but it's limited to their own class. Yes, Paragons should know other classes. It helps them be more effective at their class. But they don't need to know the minutiae of everything. Reeves are expected at a base level to know the mechanics for all the classes. A Paragon Reeve, therefore, should know the minutiae of all of the classes simultaneously. That's a lot. You, as a Reeve, act as the safety net when other players don't have a gap in their knowledge. Unfortunately, because you're that safety net, you yourself do not have a safety net of your own. It's important that because you are expected to have so much more knowledge than an average player, just in order to be an effective Reeve, that if you are looking to Paragon Reeve, you should have as the both breadth and depth of knowledge, not just depth. Also, a successful Reeve is an invisible Reeve. Where other Paragons excel when the spotlight is on them, Reeves do best when the focus is on everyone else having fun and playing a game. If you stop a game and are getting into a rules discussion, you are failing at being a Reeve and making sure the game is moving. The best way to make sure that people aren't doing something wrong is to sidebar them, to say, oh, hey, by the way, you forgot to put a descriptor in your verbal. Oh, by the way, that ability is charge 5, charge 3. Make sure you're doing all of them. If you are interrupting play, you need to fade into the background. In this way, a Reeve has to be like smarter than a battle mage, sneakier than an assassin. Like you have to be the strength of all the classes. You've also got a more unique skill set as a Reeve than the standard classes. A lot of Paragons go on to Paragon other classes. Being a good wizard transfers to being a good bard because you can cast very quickly. All classes benefit from swinging good stick. None of those skills transfer to reading, except maybe speaking quickly. Again, I struggle with that in teaching, so it's a balance thing. The skill set that Reeves cultivate is unique to them because your role in the game is fundamentally having a different goal than the standard class. You're playing this parallel game to the battle game. So this is similar to those of you who play tabletop games, being the dungeon master or game master, where there are multiple schools of thought. In some settings, people think of the dungeon master, in this case the Reeve, as being opposed to the players, as trying to thwart them, as trying to set challenges. There are certain schools of thought of Reeving where your goal is to catch cheaters and make sure that your people aren't exploiting anything, and that's not a healthy environment to be operating. It's not a healthy mindset. In my opinion, the better way to do this is think of it as all of the people on the field versus the forces of chaos. If no one knows what's going on, no game is being played. If no one can track what states are on people, no one knows how to respond. Your job is to make sure that everyone knows what's going on, is working together to play a game. The goal is not to win as it is with standard classes or help other people win. The goal is to play. It doesn't matter the success of effect of abilities. What matters is the success of the effect of the game operating as a system. If you want to be a paragon of another class, your benefit is to, if you're a healer, make sure that everyone else is staying up. If you're a wizard, making sure you're getting your spells off. If you're a Reeve, you want to make sure that everyone else is doing that. You are the ultimate support player. You are making sure that everyone's getting their spells off, that everyone is not getting healed, but coming back to life and keeping their game going. Your win condition is everyone having fun. And it's a very different mindset and a different skill set. And that's that difference between Paragon Reeve and Paragon and Standard class. There are times when you will encounter Reeves of the more hostile versus mindset. And it's important to make sure that you foster in newer Reeves the more cooperative mindset and make sure that we can form a culture of cooperative Reeving, of having the community and the game at large at heart. And part of that is that respect that I was talking about with the tendency of elitism. If people see the rules clarification page full of people talking down on those who don't know the rules as well, they're going to be turned off of asking questions, and they're not going to educate them. If people's only experience with Reeves is them getting angry that they think someone's cheating, no one's going to respect Reeves. If you want to be if you want to lead by example as a Reeve, you need to foster that positive culture in every aspect of the game. You have a mandate to make the game a better place. And that doesn't necessarily transfer to all the other classes, although I will say that anyone who is earning a Paragon should have a wider view. They should be trying to give back to the game. They should be trying to improve, whether it be battle game culture, fighting culture, rules knowledge, whatever it is. But Reeves especially. We're, as I said in the beginning, the keepers of the code. That also means that we're the stewards of the game. So I've got about 15 minutes left. Next slide, please. So this is a question and answer session. If you've got any questions, you can drop them in the Twitch chat. Actually, I'm going to go back. Can we go to slide 5, please? Application best. I actually wanted to go back and get another point. So there's there's an expectation that for Reeves, there's an expectation that at a Reeve, people think of only battle game Reeves or only tournament Reeves. There's something to be said from learning from those who do the battle games, do tournaments. There's, for example, if you talk to other paragons in your kingdom, you will learn more about not just game mechanics, but also the meta of your kingdom. If you talk to warlords and swordpath people, you'll learn more about, again, the meta, but also you'll learn how to call shots, terminology to call shots. And you can take that with you. You can take the knowledge you gain from the battle gaming and the tournaments and move it over to education and service. You can take the knowledge that you've learned about meta analysis from paragons and battle games, and you can teach a class on meta analysis. You can teach a class on identifying shot type. You don't need to be as good at executing on those as a battle game class Reeve, battle game class paragon, but you can recognize those skills and pass them on because you're in a position where you learn from everyone else and then synthesize it into your Reeve. If you, as a GMR, know who the best fighters are, you can help run a 5 and under or saplings tourney and get those good fighters to help Reeve. And that way you have stronger Reeves who know fighting better. Part of that also is that you can take the giving back to the community and again leverage it the other way. When you teach, it is the best way to learn. If you give a class on fundamental spell mechanics, you need to make sure you're real good on those fundamental battle game mechanics. You need to be able to recognize keywords. And then in looking up the keywords to write a curriculum for your class, you will be more solid in recognizing those keywords when you go back to the battle game. If you need to study up on analyzing shots and in order to run your tournament in a more effective manner, make sure that your fighters are satisfied with your Reeves, you'll have to then, putting that into practice will then help you go back and fight better or Reeve better. Reeving is in some ways the best way to become a better class gamer, a better fighter, because you have to watch. You don't have to split attention of, oh, I need to respond to that ability or I need to respond to that shot. You can just watch, learn from the others who are responding, and see what does work, what doesn't work. And it's a good way to apply yourself not only to Reeving, but to being a more well-rounded Amtgard. We also, I'm going to go back to slide 3, knowledge the W questions, and add some more notes on that. So with these questions, I'm going to touch again on the culture of rules questions and rules knowledge. Now, I cut my teeth in nerd culture in Dungeons and Dragons optimization forum. It can be a positive environment. However, there is a tendency to be very toxic, to shut down what you don't like, to try and game the system. When asking questions and later on answering questions, those pitfalls are very easy to fall into. Because once you're in a position like Paragon or Paragon Hopeful or Journeyman, you will be the person to ask in step 4. You'll be the person explaining the why in step 5. You'll be the person helping newer Reeves in step 6, learning how to move forward. You shouldn't just be able to put this into practice. You should be able to explain it to others. You should be able to, again, mentor. That's the core of what sets apart a Paragon. If you know what to do but can't explain it, try working through your thought process with someone else. Again, teaching is the best educator. If you made a call and you know it was the right one, but you can't verbalize why, if something goes wrong, how do you know why that was the right call to make? How do you know that you couldn't have made a different call and had it go better? If you decide to rebalance teams for some reason in the middle of the game and then the team balance shifts, how do you know whether it was your rebalancing or whether it was just that the game setup means the attackers are more favored? Whatever it is, you need to be able to not just ask these questions when you're learning to Reeve, but continue to ask these questions once you are comfortable as a Reeve and continue to grow, because at the end of the day, Paragon isn't the end goal. The end goal is being a better Amtgard. So if you get your Paragon, rest on your laurels, don't do anything else, you're not continuing the cycle. You're not fostering the next generation of Paragons. You're not making sure that you are still worthy of your silver trim. And so it's important to keep asking these questions and to keep mentoring. If you have an apprentice, I know that apprentices in this region are not that common. However, I think that apprenticing is actually particularly important in Reeving because of that mentorship that I talked about earlier, where you can have a shadow Reeve and help others work through these questions. Doing things like this class helps other people learn, not necessarily if they're interested in Reeving, how to be a Reeve, but also how the Reeves around them are. And if you, as a player, can recognize that the Reeves around you are going through not necessarily this process, similar process, it's easier to go with the flow and make the game better for everyone by not getting stuck in rules calls. For example, if you know that a Reeve is making a certain call because they're rebalancing teams because they recognize that that team has all the insubstantial and this team has no way to counter that, or all the enchantments and no dispels, there's less likely to be conflict around those rebalances and say, oh, I want to play with this person because you know the reasoning behind it. And while we can't expect every player on the field to know the ins and outs of Reeving, we can, as Reeves or as those who play in games with Reeves, try and put ourselves in the shoes of others, try and put ourselves in the Reeving mindset. And a little bit of understanding goes a long way. I have a little bit of extra time here. Let's skip over to slide 7, visibility. So with the equipment and style, so there's a couple different tools that I like to use when I'm Reeving. I tend to have, so for example, Golden Veil has a champions bag. We've got a bag with measuring tapes and calipers and rulers and stuff like that. Not everyone needs to have fancy stuff. Not everyone needs to have digital calipers or a pressure gauge. If you have a simple measuring tape, you can. If you have flagging tape, you can make team pennies, you can make headbands, whatever it is. You don't need to bend over backwards. However, if you have that, if you can go that extra mile, people will recognize that you're facilitating the game. And that going the extra mile is really what will set, well, when people are thinking of Paragons, that's what they're looking for. If with the accepting responsibility section, if you, I have a cautionary tale. So I was Reeving a Phoenix League event. I made a bad call around a substitution and unbalanced a game fairly. Tempers got heated, and people felt that I didn't apologize. They felt that I messed up, didn't take responsibility for it, and because of that, they lost trust in both myself as a Reeve, but also in the Reeving team as a whole. From that experience, I learned that apologies and taking responsibility have to be public. You can't just go in your corner and be like, oh, that one sucks. So beat yourself up about it. But at the same time, you don't need to flagellate yourself. You don't need to go over to the top and be like, oh, I ruined everything. This is all my fault. Nothing. This is entirely because of me. Knowing when to be in a positive mindset for your own mental health can be important too. It's easy to trip yourself up. To if you think that if you get into that negative feedback cycle of, oh, I did this, which made that wrong, I messed that up, I'm terrible read, everyone hates me, you're never going to have a positive experience again because you're going to be focused on that. Just like any service, know when you're burnt out, know when you know your own limits. At the same time, when you're having success, be gracious. Know, hey, that game went really well. That person was great. That person had good honor. Like, give them a Griffin recommendation, whatever it is. But also, part of the making yourself known is if people connect you with that success, they will think more positively of you, and you'll get that respect again. With the connecting the service aspect of best with the presence element of LAMP, as well as the make yourself known, you don't have to be in an official capacity in order to be an exemplar, to be known. You don't have to be Reevecrat. You don't have to be the Warcrat. You can just be another Reeve. You can run pickup games on the side, with assuming you're not stepping on anyone's toes. There are many ways to be a good Reeve that aren't heavy commitments. However, if you're going to go that extra mile to be a Paragon, you should be comfortable in roles of responsibility in official capacities as GMO, as Reevecrat, whatever it may be, because they are fundamentally what makes the game. You just only do things as pickup games. You're not really contributing structural progress. You're just making sure that people's time is occupied. That's not to say that's not important, but it's not going that extra mile. I don't see any other questions in the Twitch chat, but if you do have anything you want to add, my Facebook is right down the bottom. I think I'm pointing the right point. Feel free to message me. I'm always happy to, whether it be answering your questions, give feedback about Reeving. If you just want to talk shop and learn about the rules, I'm trying to make myself as available as possible. Feel free to catch up with me afterwards. It is just about 4 o'clock, so I'm going to wrap up here. And that's it.
All right, thank you, Gorovan, for that amazing Reeve lecture. There's a lot of really cool stuff in there. Thank you for bringing slides. That was, I think, the first lecture of the event that we had some slides, so it's really cool to have some extra visuals to look at. Once again, if you do have any questions for Gorovan, you can contact him post-event, and he will be sure to help you out. That said, we are going to be setting up for our Paragon Monster lecture with Paragon Monster Delas out of, I believe, Crystal Groves. I'm going to confirm that before I announce him later. But that will be happening at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. So, you've got about half an hour before our next lecture. In the meantime, why don't you head over to the Nine Blades Facebook group and check out our silent auction. There's a lot of really good items there, and all the money raised is going to support Amtgard in the Kingdom of the Nine Blades. Also, if you haven't done so yet, please head over to the Nine Blades Discord and score yourself a class credit. The invite link was just posted in chat. You can do that, get yourself a credit, maybe buy yourself some items. Have a good day on this day 3 of Paragon Bootcamp 2021. So, without further ado, I'm going to go get the next presenter set up. You're going to go do some cool stuff. We'll all rendezvous here at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. See you then.